Welcome to a new episode of Extraordinary. I'm your host, Jonathan Løw, and as always, we promise you extraordinary guests and down-to-earth conversations. Today's guest is former NASA astronaut and US Air Force pilot Terry Virts. Terry Virts is a former NASA astronaut, and he has spent more than 7 months in space as a commander on the International Space Station. He's also a best-selling author and filmmaker and a guest lecturer at Harvard Business School, and he's a keynote speaker on topics around innovation and moonshot thinking. So thanks again, Terry, so much for taking the time to join Extraordinary. We've had many amazing guests on this podcast. We've had people who were at Apple from the beginning. We've had people who have created companies that have impacted millions of people's lives. We've had philosophers, Olympic winners, gold medal winners. But you are the only one, and probably will be the only one on this show who has been to space. A dream that I guess every child has had. Has it changed your look on where we are right now, planet Earth, after spending, was it in total 7 months in space or?
Yeah, a little over 7 months. My first flight was 2 weeks on a space shuttle, and then my second flight was 200 days. I went up on a Russian Soyuz. So I think the perspective change that I got was that Earth has been around for a long time, and it's going to be around for a long time. And so all of the things that we think are so important today are going to be, moved on pretty quickly. So I think it's given me maybe a longer term perspective. That isn't to say that nothing we do matters and, some nihilistic philosophy, because the things that we do matter. There are good and evil, and we need to do good, but it does help me to not worry too much about the small things, or it should anyway. I still worry about things, but I should have a better perspective than that.
You've written a book with a wonderful title. I think I'll just look at my notes to make sure I say it the right way. It's called The Astronaut's Guide to Leaving the Planet. Can you share a little about that book?
I have a copy of it right here. There you go.
Yeah, nice.
There it is right there.
Is it a book for kids, or is it a book for everyone?
No. So I've written several books. The first one was a National Geographic photography book. I have them all sitting right here. Called
Nice.
View
Can
from
you show
Above.
it too? Just so the
Yeah. I'll show them. Here's my Nat Geo book. I'm glad I have them here. I forgot that I had them here on my desk. All right, there's View from Above. It's a National Geographic photography book. I tried to take a space mission and put it in a book. And then my second one, that's kind of an adult book, is How to Astronaut. It's 51 short chapters, basically short essays about different aspects of spaceflight. So how do you train in a space shuttle? How do you put a spacesuit on? Things like that you'd expect. Are there aliens? Have people had sex in space? There's some other things you might not expect. So this is kind
Nice.
this is the book to read by the pool in the summertime. And then The Astronaut's Guide is my kid's book that I just wrote it. It just came out last year. I was inspired to be an astronaut from books. The first book I can remember was about Apollo. The Right Stuff is one of the best books ever written, and that was what kind of showed me the path on how to become an astronaut. So I wanted to write something for kids. So that's a space mission, maybe for 10 to 12-year-olds, maybe elementary school, middle school. It's a word book. It's not like a picture book, but it is illustrated. So that's my kid's book.
And you've already sent me, before we do this episode, like so many amazing photos, and I'm gonna share some of them in a link in addition to this podcast. You just showed, like, the front page of that book is just like magical. Do you remember like the first time that you were in the shuttle and you saw like a view like this? How does it feel inside, or had you prepared so much so you were actually prepared to see what you're going to see?
It's funny. They tell me that I took the most ever pictures of any astronaut. I took a lot of pictures, over 300,000. And when you're going uphill in the shuttle, we launched at 4 in the morning. You're upside down, and then we do a roll to heads up maneuver to point the antennas at the satellites. And when we did this roll to heads up, I was a pilot. I looked out front just briefly for a few seconds, and I could see the whole east coast of America. If there's any Americans listening, you could see I-95 going from Georgia up to New York. It's the big
Wow.
highway.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, there's I-95. And then I had to get back to flying the space shuttle. So my whole time in space was like, wow, there's an amazing view, but you have to get back to work. And
Not
then as we
exactly
came,
like from a hotel point of view. It's a bit different.
yeah. Well, I was the pilot. So, the SpaceX and the Boeing, they're all automated. You just sit there and the capsule does everything. But the space shuttle was not. It was manual. Like I had buttons to push when I was a pilot, so I had to pay attention. Um, and then as we came over the North Atlantic into our first sunrise, just a few minutes after launch, as I had just got into space and we're floating, and you could see all these ice crystals, these little just well, the engines are liquid oxygen and hydrogen, and the exhaust is water. There's no pollution; it's just water, and so that freezes when you get in space, and then it breaks up because of all the vibrations. And there's thousands of these little ice crystals floating around our shuttle. Just imagine your refrigerator with ice. If you just shook the ice maker and all the dust came out. And as we flew into sunrise, they were super bright. The sunlight was reflecting off these ice crystals. So there was all these reflecting lights. It was amazing. And then before sunrise happens, the atmosphere, you get this blue band. You can see the blue band of our atmosphere. And the first impression that I had, and I've told this story a lot of times, the first view of Earth in daylight was like, I've never seen that color before. I've never seen that shade of blue before. And which was kind of surprising to see a shade of a color that I had never seen before. So, um, yeah. And then I had 7 months more of experiences like that.
Yeah, so the first flight you spent 2 weeks, and then you spent so many months. Like, what happens in? I think many people will be curious about, what goes on in a space shuttle. Like, is your? It's not like you can go for a swim or a run. It's not like you can do all your normal stuff. So, are you
Yeah.
busy all the time making sure that things don't fail, or do you have like very scheduled every day you have to do this?
Yeah. On the space shuttle, it was very busy. They schedule you down to 5 minute blocks, and every minute I was just running from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to bed. On the space station flight, my most recent flight, the long duration, it's a little bit less busy, but they still schedule you in 5 minute increments. And so you still spend half a year, we call it chasing the red line, following your schedule. Um, and on the shuttle, everybody has their own specific mission. So I was a pilot. So a big part of what I did was just keep Endeavor running and flying and docking and undocking. So, being in charge of the shuttle was a big part of it. But also, I was a robotics guy. So I did a lot of robotic operations. We used a robot to inspect the bottom of the shuttle, so we didn't have a problem like Columbia did. We used the robot to pull the payloads out of the shuttle and attach them to the station and move them around. So robotics was a big part of what I did. I was also the photo TV guy, so I did a lot of filming and video. That was a big part of what I did. And I was the crew medical officer, so I was one of the people. I'm just a fighter pilot. I'm not a doctor, but I was available for that. On the space station nowadays, there's not really pilots or mission specialists like we used to have. Everybody does everything. So,
And
and
did
the
you have
thing,
like did you
yeah,
have
go
for the
ahead.
space station, did you have a clear like mission? So why are you,
Yeah.
why are you supposed to spend all this time in space? What's so important up there that we need to spend probably like millions or billions of dollars to send amazing people up there and explore?
It's billions. It's not millions.
No.
So uh, the mission of the space station is science. That's the reason why these 15 nations came together back in the 1990s and built this amazing orbital lab, was to do science. But there's also the cooperation aspect of it, which I think is probably the most valuable aspect of the space station. There's the engineering aspect of it. How do you build and then how do you operate and keep operating the space station, which is not easy to do. How do you and then to do science, and the big reason to do science in space is weightlessness. You can take gravity away. There, of course, there's a lot of gravity, but you're moving so fast that as you fall towards Earth, you move, and that makes an orbit. So it's essentially being weightless, and that's something that you can't do on Earth for more than a couple seconds. So that's really the mission of the space station.
And what are they interested in finding out? So when they have these very extraordinary conditions that are nothing like on planet Earth,
Right.
what can you describe for like an ordinary listener human being? What are they
Yeah.
interested in finding out?
Anything you can study at university, there's probably an experiment or 10 on the space station. So a lot of what I did was medical experiments. I was basically a human guinea pig. Eyes at the time was a big thing that NASA was interested in because astronauts have been having problems with their eyes. I also
Okay.
did a rodent research experiment on bone and muscle drugs for a large pharmaceutical company. I did an experiment for vaccines on E. coli and salmonella. Um, we did combustion experiments. There's a big machine called AMS. It's looking for dark matter. So it's trying to figure out what the universe is made of, which is pretty amazing. Um, there are, like I said, anything you could study in university, there's an experiment on the space station.
Wow. I'm gonna do an episode in a couple of weeks with a guy called Lawrence Krauss, who is a pretty famous cosmologist, and
Oh, wow.
he's very interested in dark matter, this whole like that we are all small pieces of stardust and so on. But he's
Yeah.
doing it from a scientific, more like done from Earth kind of perspective.
Right.
It's not been in the space shuttle. Do you know if you guys discovered anything whilst away on the space station that they are then able afterwards to use for further research or experiments when you get back here?
That's the weird thing. So the way science works, there's a PI, a primary investigator, and they have a team, and they work for years developing this experiment. And then they send it to space, and the astronaut, a lot of the stuff I did, I never had training on. Literally, they would send me a short 5-minute training video, like, here's this thing, this is what we need you to do. So you have to learn it very quickly, and then you go do it, and you send it back, and then the scientists take it and run with it. So very few of the experiments that I did I ever hear back from. Um, some of the medical experiments, I know, we heard back, you were okay, you don't have any problems. Uh, they, this is crazy. It's been almost 10 years. It's been 9 years. And I just got an email from the primary investigator from one of the experiments. Um,
Okay.
they finally published their paper. I'm going to be a co-author on this paper, but it's been years.
Nice.
So the short answer is not really. We just, as astronauts, unless you take an interest and you stay in touch with the scientists, you don't really hear about the results of the experiments. So it's funny. People think that astronauts are the scientists, and some astronauts are scientists, but we did 250 experiments on my last mission. So even if I had a PhD in this one thing, there was a genetic PhD astronaut a few years ago, and she sequenced the first ever genetics in space, which was kind of cool. But
Mhm.
the other 249 experiments, she didn't have a PhD in, right? So most of the experiments they're not your thing. You just kind of do them and you move on. And so that's a really long answer. Most of the time, I have not heard back from the science that I did.
So what are the astronauts? Are you guys, craftsmen to make sure that everything is actually functioning while others try to do these
Yeah.
groundbreaking experiments that you couldn't do otherwise?
So astronauts, I was a fighter pilot and a test pilot. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of scientists. There's some engineers. So they come from different backgrounds. At NASA, you have to have a technical degree. So you have to have math or science or engineering, something like that. There's medical doctor astronauts. But the bottom line is when you get to space, you have to be able to fix equipment. Stuff breaks. You can't call the plumber. You have to fix the plumbing. You have to be able to do science. And so you have to be able to learn very quickly some basic things. You don't have to come up with the equation or think of the theory. You just have to take the box of stuff and operate on mice, or, deal with the plants that are growing, or, plug in the cables and turn the switches. And so you're basically a high-end lab technician, right? You're somebody that can learn how to do some basic, technical tasks. You don't have to be the expert on it. If something doesn't work, you just call or actually you call Huntsville or Europe or Japan and talk to the scientists. So astronauts are more like lab technicians, I think, than anything when it comes to science.
What does a typical astronaut diet or brunch look like?
It's pretty good, actually. I'm working on a program about that right now. It's not like it's better here on Earth. I would rather have fish in Denmark than, the kind of fish we had in space. Actually, NASA basically doesn't have fish. It was pretty bad. We had tuna, like bags of tuna fish. The Russians have the best fish. We traded food with each other, and I love
Okay.
Russian fish. Like that's the only fish we had was the Russians. But it, it's either dehydrated or it comes in bags like military food, and it's it's not bad. Like I said, the most important thing is having a variety. I flew with Samantha Cristoforetti, who's an Italian astronaut, so she had some European food, which was my favorite. You don't get that unless you're a European astronaut, but so I was able to trade with a little bit of food from the Europeans. But the most important thing is having variety. I ordered some Russian. You get your own personal bags of food you can order, and I did order some Russian food. I like their borscht. I like their fish. They have the best mashed potatoes, kartoffel puree, which is probably the same word in Danish, is it? Kartoffel
Yeah,
puree?
it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Uh, so anyway, the key to space food is variety. It's not bad. It's not as, like I said, it's better here on Earth, but it's pretty good.
What's a good night's sleep like in space? How do you fall
I
asleep?
was worried about that because I didn't
Yeah.
know if I could sleep. It's bizarre. So you get your sleeping bag on the space shuttle. It's a small. It's like it's like a Texas master bathroom, not a European bathroom, but an American sized bathroom. It's not that big of a volume, but there's six of us. So you just put your sleeping bag on the wall and sleep. On the station, you had your own little area. It's kind of like a phone booth, and that was important. That was super important. If you're going to be there for 6 months, it's really important to have your own space. And I would get my sleeping bag, put my arms and everything inside the sleeping bag, and just float. Like I wouldn't attach myself to the wall. I would just float. Um, and and I slept great. I was out. I would put headphones on just like these. I'd plug it into my computer, just like you can see the cord is plugged into the computer, and I listened to Hans Zimmer's Interstellar soundtrack. I still listen to
Nice.
that. Last night when I went to bed, I put that on. That's how I go to bed. That was really good. I listened to Sounds from Earth. Well, I have a long story I could tell, but the Russians basically sent up MP3 sounds from Earth, and they were great. They were really great. Like a rainstorm or jungle sounds or waves at the ocean or a cafe, just people at a cafe. That was really important to have sounds from Earth. So I listened to rain for about a month every night. So yeah, I would just float in my sleeping bag, not attached to anything, while listening to sounds from Earth or Hans Zimmer with my headphones.
It's actually really fascinating thinking about that. One of of course, you miss the people that you love when you're away for so long time, but you also miss like very basic stuff, like, sounds that you're used to that make you comfortable, but which are earthly. So they're not just available up there. Are there, of course, there will be sounds from your colleagues on the space station, but what else is there? Like the universe? Also, as you can hear, I'm not Lawrence Krauss. I know very little, and I decided not before this podcast to start doing Google Science and trying to, I would want to ask from a blank mind. So what are there sounds from the universe that you can clearly hear within this space station, or is it just total silence?
That's interesting. I wrote about that in my book, How to Astronaut, one of the chapters. And I helped make there's an IMAX movie called A Beautiful Planet. And a bunch of us worked on it, but I shot a lot of that film. And as part of that, I went around the space station and just with the microphone and just filmed the sounds in different rooms or different modules. On the space shuttle, the radio that we had there's something called a quindar. It's the beep. Whenever you hear old NASA astronauts talking, they go, Roger, Houston, beep. That beep sound is called a quindar. And there was this like ghostly echo. It was a ghostly sound, a really, really specific sound that I've only ever heard on the space shuttle. That's not a sound from the universe. It's a sound from the radio, but I've been talking on radios for 30 years of my career, and that's the only time I've ever heard that sound was on the space shuttle. So the radio sound was interesting. The big sound you hear is fans, because unless air is circulating, you would die. You would breathe in all the oxygen around you and just make a carbon dioxide bubble, and that would kill you. We had an emergency one time. They had to turn off the fans, and we couldn't sleep in our crew quarters because you have to have fans circulating the air. So we had to go find another spot to sleep one night on the space station, and without the circulation, within a minute or two, I would start getting CO2 symptoms, like your fingers get tingly, your lips get numb, your heart starts racing when you have too much carbon dioxide. So anyway, the fans are another sound that you hear. When I first got to the station in 2010, the European module was new. It had just been installed, something called Columbus. And I slept in there. I slept on the ceiling of Columbus for 10 days while we were docked. And the thing was banging. Like all night long, I would hear this bong, bang. And it's a metal can. And as you go into sunlight and shade, it's plus or minus hundreds of degrees, really hot, really cold. And the metal was expanding and contracting, and I could hear that popping. And that was a really weird, like, I don't know if I like that sound when you're living in this can. So there are a lot of different sounds you hear. The main sound you hear is just fans running. There's fans running everywhere. The Russians had these terrible, super loud 1970s fans that were awful. And then they got some, and the American fans are pretty good. And then they got modern fans. So the new and improved Russian fans were actually quieter than the American. Anyway, so they're always trying to make the fans quieter so they don't ruin the crew's hearing.
What does the body feel like in space? Like, do you have the same? Of course, there's the gravity thing, but what does it feel like? When you are there for a couple of weeks, and of course you can't do the normal like exercise routines and so on. So how is the body sensation after a couple of weeks out there?
The main thing for the body was you feel weightless, so it feels like you're falling. That's what it feels like. And the first couple weeks you stretch out, you actually grow a couple of inches, or about 5 centimeters roughly.
What?
And that's because right now gravity's pushing us down. If there was no gravity, you'd stretch out. And the first flight, I didn't notice anything. My second flight, it hurt a lot. And I have a problem with my spine right now. A lot of fighter pilots have back problems. So I don't know if it came from stretching and squeezing and stretching and squeezing and flying fighter jets where you're smashed. I don't know. But that does happen. A big thing, another thing, all the fluid right now, we have a lot of fluid on our legs. In space, that fluid floats up. And so your face gets really puffy. It's like, and your eyes get pulled back. Every astronaut in space just looks funny because their face is full of fluid that's normally in their legs. Um, my skin was really bad. I had a lot of rashes, and NASA didn't have any, there was no like skin cream or whatever. So a lot of astronauts, all of us get like red splotch. If you look at pictures of me in space, you'll see my face is all red. Um, I actually ended up getting skin cancer, unfortunately, after both of my flights, and that's probably from the radiation. But uh, even without the skin cancer, there's still just rashes, and you don't have enough soap. They were not giving us enough soap to shower with, so that was a big problem.
Really interesting because, like in these, at least here in Denmark, where I live, in all these like wellness places, they sort of mirror what they call, weightlessness, and you have these weather that is like sort of in the water or in a room where they sort of the story is that it's waste, and the idea is that you relax like a lot because it's so relaxing. Like
Right.
this doesn't sound like super relaxing to the body,
Well, I
or
loved weightlessness. Yeah, yeah,
mm,
yeah. But it does take a few days or a few weeks to get really good at moving around. My first 2 days in space were terrible. I was really I had the worst headache I've ever had in my life. I could only move my head about that fast. Like I couldn't, if I did that, I would have thrown up immediately. So you have to move your head really slowly. Your brain is just like, what is happening? Why are you falling? Why have you been falling for 36 hours? I can't understand this. Um, but then once I figured it out, it was like a light switch went off and I was good. And I was good for the next uh 7 months. I mean, it was weird how quickly, it took some time, and then I was good. And then when I went back, my second flight was like 4 or 5 years later. I was good on day one. Like my body remembered weightlessness. It was interesting.
now obviously you have your fighter pilot experience, which must be like extremely good training when it comes to dealing with fear. And then you go to, I think, like in from my perspective, if a person told me, I'm actually doing an episode with a guy called Naveen Jain, who has like Moon Express, which is a company that exploring the possibility of one day turning, space travel into sort of leisure activity, like
Yeah,
going
yeah,
from Denmark to the US. But when I spoke with him, I also said, I'm not actually quite sure if I wanted to go to space, because for me it's fascination, but it's also super much fear. Were, were you ever like, were you afraid either when you were going up, when you were there, or as far as I can read, also the landing part is also pretty crucial one for like getting back and actually surviving? Or did it just feel, safe because now you had been a fighter pilot? So kind of what can be more terrifying?
yeah. No, that's a good question. So they talk about, how safe is the rocket? This rocket's safe or whatever. I think safe is the wrong word to use. It's like less dangerous is a better is a better way to put it, because you're riding a rocket, you're going 25,000 kilometers an hour in the vacuum of space, and then you're coming back. So, of course, there is some danger with that. And I think my personal personality is one that I just don't get excited very easily. A lot of times people are like, "Are you mad?" Like I'll say, "Man, I'm so mad about this," and they're like, "Oh, you're really mad right now. I can tell," because I just don't. My emotions are pretty flat. I don't go up and down too much. I'm like a good Danish person. I'm not an Italian or a Spaniard. I'm more of a Scandinavian person.
Or a
Um,
Buddhist monk? I don't know. Yeah.
something like that. So I probably should have been a lot more afraid than I was, given what I was doing. But I think my personality and also my background as a fighter pilot helped me to not worry about that. We had a month on the space station where we had the alarm was going off every day. Every day we had some caution or warning. We had a really serious emergency. We thought the space station was going to die. It ended up being a false alarm, but for a day we thought the space station was done. There's a chapter, I wrote a chapter in my first book about that. So after the month, I was like, all right, that's enough emergencies. I've had enough emergencies. So I wasn't, afraid or freaking out or anything, but I was starting to feel the stress. Like that's not so. The way I deal with things is through humor. So I made a little yellow sticky with how many cautions and warnings and emergencies we had, and was it on the U.S. segment or the Russian segment? And so every day we would put a little tick mark for what happened. And anyway, it just is kind of a joke of all the things that were going wrong.
It's like space gamification or something.
Exactly, that's true. I never thought of it that way.
Or making fun of failure, which, like, I have started 5 companies, and if you want to be an entrepreneur, you know that the risk of failure is so high that it's not good if you get totally depressed if you fail, because then you should find another job. And it's kind of the same with innovation, which I have worked with a lot, and which I also read that sort of like post-astronaut era,
Right.
some of the job or work that you have done has also been within the space of like organization wanting
Yeah.
to innovate. So are you actually then
Absolutely.
using some of the NASA or like Apollo or whatever experience to can that help you when you work with the organizations?
Yeah, I do a lot of, speaking. I do guest lecturing at Harvard Business School and several other schools. I teach a course called Why Organizations Fail, which is about the Space Shuttle Columbia and Challenger accidents. I talk about innovation and how NASA got to the moon. So I love those topics. There's a lot of lessons learned from the space universe that we can bring back to our companies here on Earth or our organizations or our families, whatever. Um, so I really enjoy sharing those lessons with people. And I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, I spent 30 years in the government. I enjoyed it. But at the end of the day, even if it's NASA or the US Air Force, it's still the government. It's still a bureaucracy. They're not the most nimble, of organizations. So I really enjoy entrepreneurship. The same thing, starting companies is something I'm very interested in. I'm working with a couple of startups, which is very cool, and in different space. Energy is kind of my passion. I worked on an energy startup for the last few years during COVID. I don't think it's going to happen. Actually, I think there's some other energy product projects I'm doing. So I love business and I love entrepreneurship, and I think there's a lot of lessons from space. I think maybe the biggest lesson learned is what SpaceX has been doing, and it's a Silicon Valley philosophy and has been for years, but just fail fast. Like figure out what you're going to do, see if you can do it, and then be done. A friend of mine, so film and TV production is something I'm really interested in also. And a friend of mine wanted to start a production company, and he was like, "All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put a little bit of money in it. We'll see if it works. And in 6 months, we'll either shut it down and be done with it forever, or it'll take off." And so that philosophy of try it. If it works, you know, pour resources into it. If not, just be done and move on to the next thing. That's a military philosophy, actually. In the military, we call it reinforcing success. So if you have a lot, like in Ukraine, the Ukrainians and the Russians, if they're having success somewhere, that's where you put your reinforcements to punch through the hole. You don't want to just keep on putting your reinforcements in failure. So the fail fast attitude, I think, is a good one.
Yeah, and it also sounds like it's the fail fast, but it's also the kind of think big. It's kind of like when you're describing these, it's like moonshot thinking. It's not like open a local shop that sells groceries. It's more like work with energy or create a movie. It's not like exactly small projects that that you seem to be interested in.
I know. I wish it was funny the whole time growing up. Everybody's like, "Oh, astronaut, that's nice. You should probably be an accountant."
Yeah.
Which I love accountants. And without accountants, you wouldn't know where your money is. But I know. I think big. How to save democracy and how to change the world and make energy for everybody. Those are the kind of projects that I'm interested in.
Now you've been to space, and a lot of people are talking about that at some point we're going to commercialize it.
Hmm.
Do you see that coming anytime soon, or is that more the crazy Elon Musk type who has a vision that's way beyond what we will achieve, at least in our lifetime?
Well, space is already commercialized. I mean, there's a lot of companies doing business in space and making money. There's the Earth observation. There's a lot of satellites that are observing Earth and there's a lot of applications for that. There's communication. Um, there's a lot of obviously communication applications. The bigger, kind of the crazy, if you will, commercial applications would be sending people for private tourist
Yeah,
destinations.
exactly. Yeah.
That's already happening. I mean, Elon Musk has private orbital missions for. Um, the last a friend of mine just said, "Hey, they just offered me a seat for $35 million." So, that's an expensive trip. The Jeff Bezos rocket is a lot less. That's about $1 million, and it goes up. You get about 3 or 4 minutes of weightlessness, and you come right back down. The whole trip is 11 minutes long, so that's a fast trip to space. But there's people on Earth that have $1 million that they could spend on that. Will there be hotels in space? There's a few companies trying to build private space stations for that kind of thing. Will there be mining in space? I think the country of Luxembourg, like everybody has their niche. Canada does robotics or whatever. Luxembourg is the space mining destination. So I don't know if that'll happen. A lot of that depends on launch costs, but as launch costs come down, maybe space mining will be economical at some point. There's certainly a lot of valuable minerals out there in space. The problem is getting to them and getting them back to Earth. So there's already a lot of commercialization that's happening, and I think it'll continue to grow. There's a lot of private space companies today, and I think that 10 or 20 years from now, there'll be a lot less. They're not all going to survive, but the ones that do could really make it big.
I find the tourism part pretty fascinating, and I mean it's not total sci-fi to think that just like with aeroplanes, cost at some point will go dramatically down. But then the other aspect is, how do you actually prepare for that? Because if we were to, tomorrow we could cut the cost to the same as flying from Copenhagen in Denmark to LA, then it could be democratized price-wise. But could people actually, could I jump on a space shuttle tomorrow and survive as a normal tourist, or would I have to have months of training just to be ready to get the experience?
You don't need months of training, but you would probably need a few days of training, and you would need to be a healthy, fit person, just to make
I'll work
sure
on that.
your heart. Yeah, no, you're good. You would make it. Like a lot of people are just not healthy, especially here in America. Like that's our kind of our trademark. uh, Unfortunately, you talk about a moonshot. Trying to get obesity down is probably a moonshot that we need to work on. So I think most people could do it. You would need a little bit of training, but if the real problem is that the price is never going to come down that much because you have to go 25 times the speed of sound in order to get into space. In order to fly from Copenhagen to Los Angeles, you go zero point 0.8 times 80% of the speed of sound, not 2,500% of the speed of sound. And energy is 1/2 mv squared. The velocity is squared. So the amount of energy to get into space is a lot. It's 20 or it's 30 squared. It's 900 times what an airliner energy is, and that's just money. I mean, it costs money to get going that fast, and it costs money to slow down from that fast. So
Yeah.
the cost of air travel or space travel will always be a lot more than air travel. Um, it's not to say it won't come down some, but it's always going to be, you know. And then when you're flying in an airplane, if there's a leak, the mask comes down and you're okay. If your engine catches on fire, you can land in 20 minutes or something. That those types of problems you can't when you're in space. So there's always going to be a danger factor also that's higher. So I think there is space tourism, but it's going to be for rich people, unfortunately.
Do you dream of going back? I mean, now you spend a lot of your time helping organizations and
Yeah.
students innovate and embrace failure. But do you sometimes miss life on a space station?
Um, a little bit, I guess. It's not. I, I don't like dream of it or think of it that much. Honestly, there's things here on Earth that you don't get in space. So I would be happy to go back if I could make a movie. I would go back. If I could direct a film, I would do that. But I'm happy to be here on Earth. After my first flight, I wanted to go back. After 2 weeks in space was not enough. I wanted more. But after I had the long duration flight, I was like, oh, it was cool. And my boss at NASA said, "All right, get back in line. It'll be another 5 years." And I remember thinking, I'm in my 40s. There's things I want to do in life. I can hang around and do the same exact thing. You know, I was just, I knew we weren't going to the moon anytime soon. So I was ready to go, be an entrepreneur.
What should the movie be about?
Well, if you were going to film it in space, it would obviously be, an astronaut story. I just read a book called Solaris by S- Stanislaw Lem, a Polish science fiction book back in the 60s. And George Clooney made that movie about 15, 20 years ago. I think that would be interesting. The problem with the ISS is that, well, they just made a movie called ISS. It was an animated, CG movie. What do the astronauts do if there's a nuclear war on Earth? And so the bottom line is the Russian and American astronauts started fighting each other on the space station, which was, whatever. It was an interesting premise. Given current world events, it's more realistic probably than we would like. I don't know. That's the problem. Is like life on the space station is pretty slow and calm. And there are movies like Gravity, won an Academy Award. But that movie's been made, so I don't want to make that movie again. Um, Ad Astra was made. It was not Ad Astra was not my kind of movie, so I don't know. That's the problem. Is how would you make it? I think it would need to be like a psychological thriller kind of movie rather than the standard Hollywood action movie. That's my personal thought.
I think we should continue the brainstorming when I do the episode with Naveen, who is this guy with Moon Express and
Yeah.
who has billions of US dollars, so he can also afford more than his own trip. I think I'm going to share, that we talked, and
Yeah.
currently the idea is pretty open, but it's still a great idea. And if he can just put in the money, then you will take care of the rest of the script with a friend. Can that be a
So
good plan for now?
I would love that. I do guest lecturing at the USC Film School in Southern California. They have an IMAX class, and I help make an IMAX movie in space. So I go out there once a year and teach their IMAX students, which I love. I've written some scripts and some screenplays. I just wrote and directed a short film that we're hoping to turn into a longer project. So I love filmmaking. I kind of love it. I'm reading a book. I've read several books about filmmaking, and I'm reading one by Quentin Tarantino right now.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
it's That's how you impact people. Of all the 250 experiments I did on the space station, most people don't know these very niche, specific experiments that I did. But the IMAX movie I made has been seen by millions of people. So film and TV, and that's how you impact people.
Yeah, I always thought that the world needs more storytellers and the world needs more scientists, but it's often through the storytellers that people will then get their passion for the
Yeah.
science, because we don't really know and we don't understand, but then we want
Yeah.
to dive deeper. But I make a promise now, also on behalf of the people who will be watching and listening to this. So we have done our very, very interesting conversation. It's been really, for me, like mind-opening and mind-blowing at points. And then I will tell Naveen. So I've actually spoken to a guy who spent 7 months in space, and it's not enough that we do tourism. We should also do an amazing movie. So if he then, let's see what he says in the episode. If he's positive, then I'll for sure connect you guys. And then who knows, maybe we can make like an episode in the future where we feature the movie. That would be totally awesome. I can't promise anything though.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
But Terry, I truly appreciate your time, and also it was so nice to be able to ask these non-scientific, childish questions that I think we all have inside when we hear about space and astronauts, because the closest most of us, at least so far, will get to it is dressing up like that for a carnival, or reading like what was again the title, The Astronaut's Guide to Leaving the Planet.
Leaving the Planet's the kids' book, and then How to Astronaut is the adult book. And
How to Astronaut,
this one,
I like that title.
The goal of that book is to make you laugh and say wow. And the other thing about my books, I actually write my own books. I know some other astronauts have ghostwriters, or they have people that help write. I've actually written all of my books. So anyway, it was fun. I'm a fighter pilot, test pilot. I'm not necessarily an author kind of guy by training, but I love the process of writing.
Cool. And on both YouTube and Spotify and so on, I'm going to share the links to the books, but also some of these jaw-dropping photos that, at least when I looked at them, I was like, wow, is this actually for real? But I trust you. Don't worry, I'm not one of these flat earthers or skeptics. I believe they were actually taken from space and where you were.
I have so many flat earth stories. I was on Good Morning Britain in London, and I was in the green room, and the person that I was with, her eyes got really big, and I was like, what's going on? And then the guy went in to talk. It was Nigel Farage. So for my American friends don't know who that is, but all my European friends know Nigel Farage.
Yeah, we know him.
And then he was done, and I went on, and I thought I came all the way to London to be on Good Morning Britain to talk about space. They wanted to talk about flat Earth. So anyway, here's my joke. You can find flat earthers all around the globe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I heard the way somebody put it recently, the last 10 years have been the stupidest 10 years in our history. There's just all these crazy conspiracy theories out there and stuff, people. So anyway, it's important to open your eyes and really analyze things, because there's so much content on YouTube and on TikTok and, on the internet. People could say anything. So you really have to think, okay, is that real or not? So anyway.
Yeah, we will send kisses to if there are any flat earthers listening. I'm pretty sure you were not convinced, but hopefully you had a good laugh, and we're going to share
Yes.
those photos, and then we can start debunking them and finding out how they were made in Photoshop, and with AI you can do almost everything today.
It's crazy. So when I launched, I took off on my space shuttle right there and went to the east. You could see me you could see me crawl into the shuttle. You could see me launch off to the east. So if the Earth was flat, I'd still be flying off to the east. But luckily it's round, and I came back around and was able to land. So anyway.
I trust you. I trust that the only film studio is the one that's going to be used if you make the movie that we have talked a little about.
There's a joke. Who was the big Martin Scorsese? Who was the big 1960s? Stanley Kubrick was another filmmaker. They say the moon landing, Stanley Kubrick actually filmed the moon landing, but he's such a perfectionist, he had to film it on site. So
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Terry, thank you so much for taking the time for this awesome
This is great. Good
conversation.
questions. Very good questions.
Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Tack. Tusen tack.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Extraordinary. Remember to subscribe to our channel to get notifications when a new episode goes live. Also, visit www.extraordinary.media and sign up for our weekly newsletter so you never miss a new and inspiring episode. We wish you an extraordinary day.